This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power, written and read for you by April Ames. If you haven't read the previous chapters, please click the link in the description or in the pinned comment. That will take you to the playlist. There you can start at Chapter 1 or pick up where you left off. Part 1. Shattered. Chapter 4. Journey to the Far East. Lunch was over quickly, and I was told to pack some clothing and whatever else was needed for an overnight stay. Gable shoved a burlap sack at me to put things in. I was examining the grossly unsuitable gowns in the closet when Glenn came into the room with a tentative knock, bearing a large wooden box with beautiful designs engraved on it. "These things belonged to Lillian," he said, holding the box between outstretched hands without looking at me. I felt the food in my belly curdle. I didn't like the way he was standing there, his eyes on the floor, as if looking at me would change his mind. He was rooted where he stood, unmoving. Whatever was in the box, I didn't want it. "I can't take this," I said, pushing it away. "Please, it's all right. I want you to have it, and you'll need what's inside." He turned his face away, looking toward the closet, avoiding my eyes. "But these are your wife's things. I couldn't take it." His voice was soft, but the tone behind it was forceful. He towered over me, not in authority, just from sheer size, and pushed the box into my chest. He was still refusing to look at me. I stood as tall as I could. I still had to look up to see his face. My arms were straight and my fists clenched. "You can't order me around like that." His face swiveled to me. His eyes met the defiance in mine, and he smiled faintly. "You're right. I apologize. Forgive me." He stepped out of my personal space. I felt off balance. "Sure," I said, still angry. "Take it," he repeated, but gently this time, and with profound exhaustion. I kept my hands down by my sides. He turned, put the box on the bed, and walked out, shutting the door behind him. I stood stewing for a moment until the shaking began. I hugged myself, waiting for it to pass. Once I had my emotions under control, I looked in the stupid box. Within it, I found pants and a blouse, much better suited for a hike than the fancy dresses, but no hiking boots. I'd have to dig around in the closet for some shoes. There was also a small box of toiletries and various bits of cloth for hygiene. At the bottom laid a contraption I could only guess was for menstruation. I flung it back down in distaste, covering it up with the rags. I had dressed in the new outfit and filled the sack with everything of use for an overnight stay, and stepped into the living area to find the brothers squared off against each other. As I opened the door, they pushed away from their quarrel, smoothing their rumpled shirts and glowering at each other. "What's this?" I asked, dropping my sack on the small pile of luggage. "I was just reminding Gable of his promise," Glenn answered, stalking off to the wine rack and returning to face Gable with not the 3 he had promised, but 4 bottles of wine. "One is for her. The rest are for you. Take them and welcome. Only keep your end of the bargain, or be warned, I will cut off your thumbs." I thought that was an odd threat until I remembered that Gable was a cleric, a priestly scribe. He couldn't write without thumbs. Still, such a hateful outburst made me feel as out of place as a drop of water in an oil can. Gable bristled and involuntarily twitched the thumb of his right hand. "I will keep my word, brother. I am not one to neglect my responsibilities." The words struck Glenn in the heart like an arrow. His body recoiled from the blow. Even I understood the vicious undercurrent of that remark. I stepped forward, coming eye to eye with Gable before my brain had a chance to think better of it. "If you ever speak to him like that again, I will personally take the thumb he cuts off and shove it up whatever you elves have for an asshole. Got it?" "Back off, whore," he snarled in my face with breath so strong it had to be at least 40 proof. Suddenly, the cocktail of emotions I'd been suppressing rose up and overflowed. I hadn't had the chance to fight my tormentors, but the need, the delayed reaction, was still there beneath the surface. Gable turned his head toward Glenn, his foul mouth opening to speak more hateful words, and I girl-punched him in the temple with all the strength I had, which admittedly wasn't much. It stung my knuckles, and I shook my hand to ease the pain as he fell backwards, semi-unconscious, onto the rug. I assumed the wine had helped a great deal in his keeling over. I just stood there, shaking and looking at the drool escaping from Gable's open purple mouth. What if he had blocked me, or hit back? I felt stupid and impetuous. Glenn pulled me into his arms and held me closely, chuckling as I continued to tremble until the shaking ebbed. It felt wonderful to be held, but I couldn't think that way. I had to stop this. I stepped away, looking up into his kind face. "Thank you, Alana," he whispered, chuckling. I was blindsided by a new wave of pleasant emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. His embrace had felt like home, or as near I could imagine home to feel like. I ran to the bathroom. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at my reflection. I was even more healed now, and the tiny scars all over my face were completely gone. I'd have to keep my emotions in check from now on. I couldn't go punching every wino I met, and I certainly couldn't get comfortable in Glenn's arms, no matter how right it had felt. I splashed water onto my face and forced myself to calm down. When I left the bathroom and returned to the brothers, Glenn was just as I had left him, standing there with his arms at his sides. He looked stunned and confused. I ignored it. I had things to do. Gable was also as I left him, but stirred now, struggling to lift his head. "Shall we be going?" he asked from the floor, with his weight on his elbows, his speech slurred, but expressed with such an air of self-importance that I laughed. "Yep," I said, offering my hand to help him up, conciliatory. "I'm ready." It was a long walk through the village. I was left to my own devices, both brothers walking ahead of me, but not necessarily together. It seemed that everyone in town knew them. Nearly an hour was added to our trip due to civilities alone. I was mostly ignored on this pilgrimage, and that suited me fine. I preferred to be alone with my thoughts. I walked behind the men, admiring their backsides and wondering what Ambius would be like. It was him I was to meet first and try to convince to rejoin the other watchers. The shoes I'd found in Lillian's closet were beginning to blister my toes, but I kept on. "What's a watcher?" I asked Glenn at our first rest stop. We sat around a small, hastily lit fire, warming our bones and resting. The autumn air was bone-numbing when we weren't moving. I'd pulled off the awful shoes and was warming my newly formed blisters. "Ah," he said, pulling apples from a bag and distributing them between the three of us. "Well, they are the ones the Creator put in place to guard and watch over this world." "But they are more than that, simpleton," Gable added crabbily. "They are from the eternal realm, sent here to be our liaisons to the Creator. They are immortal, original. They are deadly and wise, kind and brutal." I shivered at the thought. And I'm supposed to convince an eternal dangerous being that he should join the cause and be friends with the others again? Don't forget, O creature from the evil world, that he has been waiting for you since the warlord crawled from your world into ours, bringing our destruction, Gable sneered. "You're an asshole," I told him bluntly. Directing my question to Glenn, I asked, "How can it be possible that I can help your realm at all? I don't know anything." Glenn bit his apple, chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and said, "You are enough. If you needed to know, you would. If you needed to remember, you would. Since you can do neither, I would venture to guess that only now is required of you, and now is enough to occupy anyone. And what is an asshole? An ass is a common pack animal, is it not?" I smiled back at his innocence, letting it drop when I noticed that Gable was studying me with malign intent, that same barely disguised lust in his eyes. I took the thumb of my right hand and stuck it out, while my left fist formed a very tight hole, through which I shoved the thumb and pulled it back out. I pointed at Gable and said, "That's an asshole." Gable's gaze dropped away. Glenn laughed for a bit longer than strictly polite, and I hid a smile of satisfaction. Finally, we all stood up, put out the fire, and continued walking, the elf, the asshole, and me. It was getting close to evening. The sun was sinking low, stretching our shadows out like giants before us. Gable had opened a new bottle, leading the way, and Glenn had fallen back to walk by my side. My feet were killing me. The shoes were at least a size too small. I had wide feet, built for walking, but not in these narrow cloth things with wooden soles. They were pretty, though, rich brown with embroidered flowers, but I figured I wasn't one to take fashion over function. A movement in my peripheral vision caught my eye, and I turned to find nothing but hazy forest filled with darkness in the shadows of the retreating sun. I heard a flutter of wings in the trees, and I quickened my step automatically. Glenn eyed me, looking back where I'd been staring. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No, just thought I saw something," I said, waving the notion away. He nodded, looking back just to be sure. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling I'd had while looking into that darkness. He slowed his stride, which was a blessing to my aching feet. "I'll tell you a story from my childhood to ease your mind," he said. I nodded, smiling my approval up at him. "Today is Warlord's Day, as you know. Well, we have a tradition that the night before Warlord's Day, foxes come out to spy on the little children, asking the mice in their houses whether they'd been good or bad." "What if they don't have mice?" I asked. "Then they ask the spiders in the corners. If the child has been good, the fox leaves a little treat on the doorstep, usually nut pies or some sort of sweetie. If the child has been bad, the fox leaves something else." "What?" "Well," he said, running long fingers through his hair. He seemed reluctant to tell me. I wondered what a fox could possibly leave a child in punishment. Gable turned around with an enormous grin on his face, revealing teeth purple with wine stains. "He leaves a big steaming pile of excrement," he answered. "No, he doesn't," I said, incredulous. "I'm afraid so," Glenn said, smiling broadly to himself. "You're just messing with me. There's no way that's real." Gable looked at Glenn, and both elves erupted with good-natured laughter. "All right," Glenn said. "He leaves bits of household rubbish, not a pile of feces." "You really had me going for a second there. Trash is way better than poop, but still, I bet you have exceptionally good children," I remarked. Gable turned back to the path and said, "Not really. The Warlord's foxes are just a way to bribe children into being good." Something about that struck me as familiar, but I couldn't put a name to it. We continued marching toward the ever-darkening horizon as my blisters developed blisters. The autumn woods of the eastern lands broke suddenly to reveal emerald-green rolling hills stretching for miles. Huge, dark mountains loomed up behind the grasslands, blocking further travel eastward. Relieved by the soft carpeting of grass, I slipped off the wretched shoes and dug my toes into the turf. It felt wonderful. Glenn laughed kindly at my eccentricity. Nothing for it, though. If I took one more step in the shoes, they'd start filling up with blood. I could walk faster barefooted anyway. "Not long now," Gable's voice floated back to us. We walked on. Sometime later, near sunset, maybe an hour past the tree line, a black and white tuxedo cat with green eyes trotted up to us. Gable growled at it, and I wondered why I hadn't seen more animals in this world so far. The cat hissed at Gable as it passed, but stopped and sat in my path, twitching its long black tail. "Well met, my lady," he said. "Hello," I answered, the redness climbing up my neck and face at the thought of talking to a cat. "What's your name?" I bent down to stroke his chin. He purred noisily, shifting his face so that I could better scratch the areas he liked. "I am Nanu, friend of Ambius," he announced, and bowed his face to the grass. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Nanu," I said, curtsying as best I could from my bent-over position. "It's an honor," Glenn added, bowing to Nanu respectfully. Nanu sat up straight and glanced between the brothers. "Yes," he said, his voice low and fluttery, like an extension of his purr. "It is, but I come with news." He directed his gaze toward Gable. "Ambius bids you come as quickly as you can. You are being followed." I whirled to look back the way we had come, but saw nothing. "My lady," Nanu said, exasperated, "do you think they would show themselves easily? No, my lady one. Come with me, and all will be well." The cat began trotting back the way he came, his tail raised high, exposing his little pink anus. I silenced a snicker and quickened my step. We followed the cat through the failing light to a cottage set alone on a hilltop in the middle of the grasslands. Nanu disappeared when the building came into view, and we began to jog, not wanting to be caught in the open by whatever was following us. I looked back over my shoulder again and thought I saw a shadow out of place among the hills, but then it was gone. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. You'll always find it in the description and pinned in the comments. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released. I'll release one chapter every week until the audiobook is finished.